our final speaker series presentation of 2020, in our own words, the story of Clark County's Indigenous women leaders. I'm April Busby, coming to you from our newest exhibit, Her Story, Founders, Leaders, and Visionaries. We are so excited to end our year celebrating the many contributions women have made to this community by bringing you a conversation between three amazing leaders in the Indigenous and local community of the Ridgefield National Wildlife. Rachel Cushman is a member of the Chinook Nation, Secretary-Treasurer of the Chinook Indian Nations Council, and a Canoe lead. And Carissa Lowe is a Cowlitz Indian Tribe member, a member of the Cowlitz Tribal Council, and Director of the Cowlitz Tribe Education and Arts Fund. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors. First, we'd like to thank Wager Audio for all their help this year with streaming our programs, like the speaker series. If you need help with digital streams, virtual events, or production services, take a moment to check them out. They do incredible work and have been a pleasure to work with. We also want to thank the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission. Their support year in and year out has been vital for keeping our speaker series going, and it is because of their support that we are able to bring you this and all our digital speaker series presentations free of charge while we all do our part to fight COVID. And now to this month's presentation. Since time immemorial, the Indigenous women of the region share a rich history as economic, spiritual, and political leaders. Their contribution to the well-being of their community cannot be understated. But leadership roles come with its own issues. In this discussion, our presenters discuss the past, their own lives and experiences as leaders in their community, and touch on the future of women in the Indigenous Nations. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's good to see both of you. I appreciate you taking time today. Like I mentioned earlier, we're just going to have a loose conversation about what it kind of means to be an Indigenous woman leader in Clark County today. And I just wanted to, I guess, both give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves a little more fully, and then maybe a little bit about why you were interested in participating in our conversation today, and then we can just take it from there. If you have either one of you, feel free to start. I can also call on people, which seems very authoritarian and weird.
Rachel, if you want to start.
Okay, Flahali, I'm Rachel Cushman, Naika Yakul, Naika Tolkam, and Saika Chinook, and Saika Classic, Kachlamet, Wakayakam, Willapa, Pilor Chinook. Hello, my name is Rachel Cushman. I'm a member of the Chinook Indian Nation, which is comprised of the Classic Cathapotle of present-day Oregon, Wakayakam, Willapa, and Lower Chinook of what is now the state of Washington. I am a member of Tribal Council. I have multiple hats within Chinook Indian Nation. I'm also a skipper and lead puller, depending on who's skippering at the time, of the Chinook Canoe family, and a mother. I think that's the most important role. I have two sons, Kaneem and Isik, or Isik. Kaneem means canoe, and Isik or Isik means paddle. And raising them is one of the most important jobs that I have, I think, especially during this time, during a pandemic. We really realize that how important parenting is, that, you know, you have less help than you typically would. And so taking that role really seriously right now. And then let's see, why did I want to participate in this? You know, the first time that I was out at Cathapotle at the Plankhouse, I was a small child. It was for one of the initial digs, and, you know, just being in the area is like home. And I grew up, my family, the Chinook Indian Nation is from the mouth of the river, but my dad's family is from the gorge. And so, you know, I grew up in the Portland area, and I spent a lot of time in the area, and it's home. So I'm super happy to be able to participate and partake in a little bit of home right now.
Excellent. Carissa?
Klahalia, everyone. My name is Carissa Lowe. I'm a member of the Cowlitz Indian Tribe, and I've served the tribe in a variety of capacities over the last couple decades. I've been on our education committee for, I think, about 18 years. I served on the tribal council for 15 years. And now I'm chairman of the board for the Education and Arts Fund that serves Clark County. And I'm also a board member on the tribe's statewide fund, which you may guess from the name, serves nonprofits located statewide throughout Washington. And so I grew up in Longview, Washington, which is in Cowlitz County, just north of Clark County, but my family has always spent a lot of time in Clark County. It's part of the Cowlitz ancestral homelands, and I'm just really excited to be here today to honestly to hang out with you folks and get to spend some time with some amazing women who love their communities and are active in them, and to learn a little bit more about each other, and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about Cowlitz. And oh, I should also mention that I am also a mother. My son, Ragnar Skanewa, we're Icelandic on my dad's side, and then we're descendants from Chief Skanewa on my mom's side. And I'm used to juggling a day job and my tribal work, but I'm not used to juggling a day job and my tribal work while locked in my house during a pandemic with my wonderful toddler. So it's been an adventure, learning how to get things done this year and learning about the Zoom and these other technologies that we're using to stay connected, stay safe in these weird times. So I'm really excited to be here.
I think that it's kind of worth mentioning, like, how we have to always roll with the new technologies. It's definitely been a learning curve for all of us. I think I also am a mom. I have a very precocious 10-year-old that is running around somewhere Ridgefield right this moment. I think some of the reasons why I'm excited to facilitate this conversation today is because I'm Western Band Cherokee. My daughter and I are not enrolled, and I feel such a great love for this area. I was born in Portland. My dad was a riverman, and I grew up on this river. My earliest childhood memories are being on tugboats on the banks of the river. And I have a deep love for this river. And so I think I attached myself to the waterways before I attached my ways to the landscape. And for me, as knowing more about the communities here that have welcomed me in, it just seems that this is the most natural place I could have ended up, is working for the Plankhouse and the Refuge. I had cousins that grew up in Ridgefield, so the county itself definitely feels like home, but for me, it's the approach from the river that feels most like home. And so I'm always excited when I get to talk about stewardship of landscape and the water and things like that, because, as I teach in our education program, women in this area, the landscape we see is because of the women, the oaks, the wetlands, everything. And so when I look out at the landscape that I help tend and manage today, or even when I'm driving around anywhere in the county, I am filled with the awe and knowledge that Indigenous women's hands crafted this landscape. It is a fully anthropogenic, made by human hands in cooperation with the environment. And so for me, the sense of place is so deep, because I know both of your direct ancestors made this county what it is. And that's what excited me about facilitating this, because as someone who loves the land and plants, I'm a plant nerd, it just made it really exciting for me to be able to have a conversation about Indigenous leadership in this landscape that I've grown so attached to and grown up in. Do either of you have maybe a good example or a story from your elders that is safe and comfortable for you to share, that just stands out of what you kind of feel like it means to be an Indigenous woman leader in your community, specifically your tribes, or maybe even something that happened in school or pivotal in college or anything like that, that just like it's something that taught you about how you knew about your own leadership role was going to be, or that you were just like, that's the kind of person that if I end up in a leadership role, that's how I want to see myself, carry myself through the world.
I can start again.
You lit up. You definitely have a
just thinking about how you framed that question. I'll start off by saying that leadership is something that is both inherited and earned in my community, that you can be born to hereditary chief lines, but if you don't do the work, then it really means nothing. And so that's how I approach things. So I come from a community where you give until it hurts. You know, nobody can see, but I have a neck brace on right now. Been working pretty hard for the tribe during the shutdown, prior to the shutdown as well, but exceptionally hard during the shutdown, trying to make sure that we're getting services to people and doing the important work that needs to be done. And I like to joke that I broke my back carrying the tribe, you know, like, you know, just because that's how it is. And that's how I was taught. You give and you give and you give until it hurts, and you keep on giving some more. And, you know, several others in the community have said that. And I, like Carissa, come from hereditary chiefs. My grandfather was Wasilta, or Washington, that was his pen name, his white person's name, at the Cathapotle treaties. And so I take that extremely seriously, that's where I come from, and hold myself in such esteem. And so I try to make sure that I live up to that name and to that family line. But talking about college experiences, when I was 19 years old, I had the pleasure of meeting Winona Duke for a second time. I got to hang out with her. I was introducing her for a women's speaker series, a women of color speaker series at the University of Oregon. And, you know, I was shy. I was 19. I was just, you know, kind of getting into the leadership role that I have today. And she sat down with me and she was like asking me all these questions, making me like really blush. Some of them were like not things that I pictured her asking me about relationships and stuff. But one thing that she said to me that has stuck with me is that you need to be in it for the long haul. This isn't easy. The work that we do with Indigenous women is not easy, and you need to be able to be in it for the long haul. So always keep that in mind and pace yourself. And so that's what I try to do with the work that I'm doing is, you know, be in it for the long haul. It's not something that happens overnight. The work that we do, changing the way the landscape looks or dominant society treats Indigenous people or Indigenous lands, doesn't happen overnight. And so, you know, just being in the present and thinking for the future. And so that's my answer.
I love that. Also totally jealous. I have not met Winona Duke, but
I'm kind of like fangirling over here. I was like, what's the coolest
thing? She's totally chill. She's a very chill person. Super awesome.
Awesome. Well, I have a less star-studded answer, but I really love what you talked about with leadership being inherited and earned. And I feel like that really captures how my family approaches it too. So I have a lot of really strong examples of leadership within my community and within my immediate family. Women who kind of show the different facets of leadership. Like I have elders in my family who always made sure that we knew who we were, and even when we were facing a lot of opposition, saying, "Oh, you don't belong here," you know. Chinook is still battling for recognition, so you know what that's like when you have these external forces who aren't recognizing you, and it's frustrating and it can be invalidating, but at the same time, you know who you are, and you can't be turned from that fact. And I had elders in my family growing up all my life who always made sure that we knew that we were Cowlitz, and that we had stories from our history and from our culture. And they didn't just keep that to the close genetic relatives, they expanded their love outwards into the tribe. And so like my grandma Yvonne and her sisters, my Auntie Call and my Aunt Ernie, always made sure that people felt welcomed and knew about their heritage. And Aunt Ernie actually kind of became everyone's Aunt Ernie in the tribe. Little tiny lady, full name was Ernestine. But everyone loved their Aunt Ernie, and she would always go in for the hug and ask how you were doing, and she knew everyone's names and always made sure that she connected with everyone and knew how their lives were going and what things were happening for them. And that really taught me about the power of family and community. And then other members of my family, like my mom, have taught me about how you don't need to have a formal leadership role in order to have a strong impact on your community. She's someone who always shows up if you've got a work group or a committee or something needs doing, then Becky's right there. helping get her done. But at the same time, when people ask her, hey, do you want to like run for office, or do you have an eye on any like tribal council seats, she always says, no, you know, a strong tribe needs to have an involved and informed membership who's ready to help and understands what's going on. And that's how she shows up as a leader in her community. And I've always really valued that, because I've been more on the political side, and she supported me 100% in that. But she's always said, you know, there are a lot of different ways to be a leader, just like there are a lot of different ways to be cowlitz. So you don't have to be the, you know, the best hunter or the best fisher in the tribe to count as a cowlitz. You can cowlitz in your own way, and you can lead in your own way too.
I love that answer. I love it.
I think the thing that I love most about both of your answers is that it subtly speaks to how there's just subtle ways that leadership styles that we are indoctrinated into are so different culturally. Like, I have gotten similar questions like, well, you're so loud and you're so pushy and you're so opinionated. Why aren't you doing those things? And I'm like, there are better people suited to it. I'm a much better organizer and behind the scenes person, really. And I feel like that's how leadership is expressed for me, because I am good at being an excellent supporter and an organizer, but I don't necessarily want to be the front person. And I know that we've all probably had aunties in our life that are like, you're going to do this, and getting voluntold, versus like, I'm in a think group, and we were discussing organizational structures, and they kept defaulting. And it's like, you know, you don't have to have that kind of hierarchy. It's not required. And you're so indoctrinated into a system that demands hierarchy in such a stiff way that you can't step outside of that. And I'm always feel blessed to be part of a community that things like, I guess what really resonates with me right now is that we're seeing across the globe, there are lady politicians that are bringing their infants to the floor in parliament and things like that. And I'm always like, I'm very supportive of this. This is not to decry any of these women's work, because they should be able to do it. But I don't recall in any community I've been a part of or welcomed into in across Indian country, where the idea that when you go to council or when you go to speak or when you go to work, you leave your child. And it's always been like, well, how are they going to learn to lead if they're not there watching the leaders lead? And so that wasn't something I intended to talk about when we approached the day, but I'm just wondering, how do you feel about those ideas where things that I would politely put forward are common sense in our collective communities versus things that are kind of seen as landmark and world breaking right now, because those are things that are on the world stage. And how are you feeling about those things?
So actually, oh my gosh, I love everything you just said. So I want to share how I became a member of council. So Chinook Indian Nation has a process where you have to vote in person and be present in order to vote. And apparently, before the elections happened for a couple of months, that the community was like, we're going to vote for Rachel to be secretary treasurer. So I'm the secretary treasurer. And the person who was in the position before me was stepping down after 20 years of being the secretary treasurer. And so literally 5 minutes before the election, and I had no idea any of this was happening. I just for 1 week weaned my 2-year-old and was, just there present, and she comes up to me and she's like, hi, Rachel. And I'm like, hi, Peggy. And she's like, so I'm stepping down and I'm nominating you to be the next secretary treasurer. And we already have a second for you. So, okay. And I'm like, my husband was off running around with my kids so that I could focus on what was going on. I didn't even have an opportunity to talk to him about it. I didn't have an opportunity to do anything. But I was always raised that you do as you're asked by your elders. And so I'm like, okay. And then when it came time that unanimously my whole community supported me, and I was, in that position, unaware, because if they'd given me time, I'd probably been like, talk myself and like, no, this is why I can't do it. I'm living 3, 4, 5 hours away. It's just not going to work for how we're doing this right now. Anyways, long story short, I got elected. during the council meeting, my husband comes in after chasing the kids outside, and he asked my cousin, "Where's Rachel?" And she points up to the front where I was sitting, and he's like, and I'm like, "Hi." He was way in the back. I was like, "Hi." Anyways, and so that's how I earned my position. You know, they wanted me to be in the position. They didn't give me the opportunity to descend, and that's just how it was. It was an elder woman that wanted me in that space, so that's how I became in that space. To answer the question about children in the workplace, I think that is something that, you know, it's about time that it happened. You know, I worked at Portland State University for years and was the manager of the Longhouse or Native American Student Community Center over there. And one of the reasons why I left was because it wasn't a friendly workspace for my child. And it's a long story. We're not going to go into that because it's a whole different thing. But, you know, at that time, I was also involved in the Portland Leadership Development Program, the Oregon Lead for Native leaders across the state. And my son, you know, had just been born, and I took him to one of the youth and elders meetings, and the elders said, "Thank you for bringing your baby," you know, and I nursed him and did everything. And they're like, "Thank you for bringing him, because this is where it's supposed to happen." And so since then, I've taken my children everywhere. I take my children absolutely everywhere. I have multiple pictures of them falling asleep on the chairman's lap during a council meeting, or falling asleep on my lap, or sitting next to me with their head on the table asleep, because, you know, that's where they are. And I always take them onto the floor with me when we're singing and dancing. I had strapped them to my chest when I was dancing when they were infants, and have them come out on the floor with me and sing and drum and dance with me. But you know, this is where they learn. This is how they know their identity, is having them involved really young. And so when you ask my children who your people are, they're like, "I'm Chinook. That's who I am." And, you know, and then they relate to things to being Chinook, from like what happens when people pass away to, you know, learning and being able to tell stories. They're like, "Oh, Mom, it's the first frost. Did you see it happen just a couple mornings ago?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, it's so exciting." They're like, "We can tell old stories." And I'm like, "Yeah," because they were there when, you know, typically it's supposed to be an adult event. No, they were there and they were learning, and that's what's so important. And I'm not going to take up any more time, sorry. But
No, but it's awesome that you highlighted, especially I think the role that your husband plays in supporting you, because I too have the rockstar supportive spouse, and
Hello.
and he's in,
Hello.
and but I have a hot mic, and I love you, darling. And this is being recorded, and I love you. So, yeah, rockstar supportive spouse who is always there taking care of the kiddo. My mom is also one who, she was clear that my son is going to go to the political events and the cultural events, and if I need a hand, then we're going to make sure that we've got at least one person there who I can hand the kiddo off to while I'm doing a thing. But honestly, a thing that I love about working within Indian country is that it's really normal to have your kid at a meeting and to raise them, like you say, within the culture so that they know who they are. And this is a normal thing for him. Like, oh, of course we go to tribal council on the first Saturday of the month. And oh, of course we go to the powwow, and we do this and we do that. And I love that it's going to be normalized for him in a way that I think was kind of hard for a few generations while we were fighting for recognition. And I'm not going to cry. I'm a little sleep deprived. No, I'm good. So yeah, I have brought him to day job stuff. I work for a private foundation called the Meyer Memorial Trust for my day job. It's in Portland. And thankfully, there are a lot of mothers in my workplace. And so I have had days where my childcare has fallen through, and I've just said, you know what? I'm just bringing the kid. And thankfully, it's worked out pretty well. My coworkers have been really gracious and understanding about it, and it's been a really supportive workspace. So I'm grateful that I can find that outside of Indian country as well. But definitely, it's so much more normalized when I'm at a Cowlitz event or another Native space. Like, we know the importance of building bench strength in our leadership and bringing that next generation up so that they're ready to step forward and take on the role when they need to.
I think the only thing I have to add to that is just being a single mom. There's a huge amount of comfort knowing that if I'm going to a work meeting, especially if it's after work hours, anywhere in the Native community, people aren't going to be like, oh, they'll be like, where is Josephine? Rather than, oh, you brought your child, versus any, dominant society, Western organized thing. I have to either make excuses or make sure I promise that she'll be occupied, and there has to be reasoning, or it's just not an option. And it's when you don't have the extra pair of hands, it really brings home the difference between how we organize our communities and how we prioritize motherhood. And making it easy for people to participate in parenthood as well as professional and community life. So that's kind of the last thing.
You really nailed it though when you highlighted that whole dominant society aspect of it, because I think in Indigenous communities, it's so much less of a weird perception that we're all these John Wayne individual, like lone cowboy types who are just making it on our own with no support from anybody. Like in Indian country, I feel like it's just understood that we're all group projects, and that yes, I might be like standing up on the stage on the council or something, but I'm here because of the aunties who pushed me there, and the mom who's holding the baby, and the husband who's gonna tap in, or the other aunties. So I love that we don't have to pretend to just be solo acts, because our community understands.
Yeah, and it's very weird for me now that I'm in my 40s, that my friends and soul sisters I know I'm not auntie to people like Zoomers or millennials and Gen Xers, but like now I'm an auntie to littles, and I'm like, oh dear, okay, I gotta pretend I'm a grown up now, because it's sort of like the transitioning to that new hat. I'm like, I'm not an auntie with a capital A, but I'm like, oh, that's going to be me someday. I need to work on my gravitas and being more serious.
It's really, you know what, though, you are an auntie with a capital A. I think that's something important to think. There's a book that you should read by Michelle Jacobs. She's Yakima. It's called The Auntie Way, and I think you'll love it. I'm giving like a book suggestion during this talk, but it's really great because it really encompasses all different kinds of aunties and how important every single auntie role is. Did you lose me? Sorry, somebody was calling me. Did you get that? What I was saying? Somebody.
Yes. No, you're saying.
Okay. Anyways, but like how each of us have a different role to play, and I also wanted to go back about the dominant society versus Indigenous communities. I think it's also relevant, like the separation between adulthood and childhood, and not having children present in other communities of color. Not all, but like I went to an NAACP event fundraiser dinner for raising funds for the NAACP, and one of my really good friends was giving this prayer for the event, and she's Caribbean, and she has a really strong tie to the Indigenous people of the area, so she wanted me to go there to support her, and she wanted me to bring my family to support her because children ground her and everything, like the Indigenous community. And I was the only person at this event that brought their children, and yeah, my children were like playing at the table with cloth napkins and glass and $50 plate meals or whatever. And I was just like, is this okay? She's like, I need them here in order to do this, so yes, it's okay. And everybody was looking at me like, lady, what are you thinking? And I'm like, this is just normal for me. I bring my children to anything that I do. And another thing is going to Native versus dominant. So I used to participate in the tribal leaders discussion at the U of O Longhouse, and go and participate with the tribal leaders in the president's office. And I had just given birth to my second child, and it was like only a couple weeks after birth, and the president's in there, and my baby starts crying, and I'm like, oh, I'm like, it's okay. And my other kid's like running around. I'm like, come on, calm down. And the Native liaison's like, it's okay, Rachel. And he turns to the president. He's like, in Native communities, this is how it is. We deal with children present. And he's like, you just keep doing you, Rachel. I was like, okay, cool. And so that's how it was. But I thought those two stories were important to share.
No, they are. I think so, for sure. I'm gonna take a breath for a second. Just that was really good. I just where we went with the arc and things like that. I think we're getting close on time, but I want to ask maybe one or two more questions for us to kind of meal around. Let me see what my notes say. We've covered a lot of the big things, but looking towards the future, like how do you see, and you can do micro, like in your community and in your families, and then maybe bring it out to a bigger level, but looking towards the future, like how do you see Indigenous women's leadership impacting our communities, but even outside of Native community in Clark County as a whole, or anywhere else you would like to take that? Just where do we, and I'll, because it rearrange, I'll call on Carissa because now you're next to me on Zoom at rearrange. So where do you see like Indigenous leadership in the county going? And like I said, feel free to make it as intimate or as broad as you like.
You know, I think the pandemic has taught us a lot about how we've organized our society, just in terms of the dominant culture norms. Like, you go to your workplace, your kid goes elsewhere, you never bring your kid anywhere, your elders, they're off somewhere taking care of themselves. I don't know, like that whole kind of disconnected nature of how we have set things up has proven not sustainable during the pandemic. And so tribes, I think, both have a more interconnected view of how the various generations of a community play off of each other and help each other. And also, we've survived a lot of pandemics. So I'm hopeful that our challenging experiences in the past can help us be leaders as we try to figure out what our new normal looks like. And as we hopefully someday soon emerge from a post-pandemic world. And I'm so excited about all the opportunities that we have. I know Cowlitz has just a lot of really smart, driven, dedicated, passionate people who are excited about raising our profile within this part of our traditional homelands and helping out the community. You know, we've got our giving fund that's dedicated to Clark County specifically, and I'm so excited to see the difference that we can make with that. We've been partnering with the Community Foundation for a lot of our outreach within the community now as we build our bandwidth, and they've been just a wonderful partner. So looking at other organizations and institutions within the community that we can partner with and really show ourselves to be a valuable voice for the future for this county, and also respecting the rich history of this area. And I know I'm less familiar with the Chinook people, but I've always been impressed with the folks I've met. And so I'm super excited to have more opportunities to engage with you folks, because I know you have just a wealth of amazing people and tons of potential to create more awesomeness in the community. So I look forward to building closer relationships between our tribes.
Likewise, I all of your answer, just love all of it. I think that also, to add on to that, you know, just having a presence in every space, you know, making sure that the government to government relationships are happening, the relationships between the tribes, and being a part of every part of government, whether it's local, regional, state, federal, is super important, because, you know, Indigenous voices are heard by that. You know, they start to influence those different parts of society when we're part of them. You know, over the last several years, we've had more people in Congress, more people on state, more people locally running for elected positions, but also making a difference legislatively. You know, the time immemorial curriculum is helping influence in Washington the education, what the education our children are getting. So, you know, 20 years ago, people were educated that the Indians were just extinct, right? You know, and that's what was said. And, you know, there's still teachers teaching that kind of crud. I'll be PC on here, crud, but you know, there's more people becoming educated and understanding that there's an Indigenous people. If you look over in Kalama, they're having discussions about Indian mascots and trying to do what's culturally respectful. That didn't happen before. You know, there was tribal mascots all over the place. In Oregon, they banned them altogether. There's a couple exceptions, the relationship with tribes, but overall, our society is becoming more educated about Indigenous issues, and reality is what we do works better than what the dominant society has been doing. And so they're starting to adopt some of that because it's becoming known. But I think that education component with the time memorial curriculum in Washington and the Senate Bill 13 in Oregon is really starting to influence society, and just continuing to push it in the development of curriculum and making sure that our voices are heard is super important to changing the future.
If I could just really drive sorry, I'm not trying to take up all the airtime, but Rachel just
No, do it.
about having Native voices involved, like in throughout levels of leadership, both at the local, the hyper-local level and statewide and national, is so critical. Because I think, and that education piece, because I think a lot of folks just haven't been properly educated about Indigenous presence, both historically and in a contemporary sense. And a lot of folks just kind of have us caught in amber, where they think, oh, you know, back in the day with the teepees, they all had teepees, right? That was just the thing, everybody. And it's like, no, you guys, I'd
just like to point out, we have 3 different groups here. None of us are teepee people. I love teepees. No problem with teepees, but 3 different groups. No teepees among us.
lots of housing options available in Indian country, just saying. But yeah, kind of bring nuance and also a contemporary context to people's understanding of Native identity, I think is absolutely critical. Because I've had people ask me, well, do you live in a teepee? Do you hunt buffalo? Well, then you're not a real Native, are you? And I'm like, bro.
My dude.
Yeah.
I love that. I feel that so deeply. I got in an argument with someone the other day about whether corn was a fruit. And I'm like, it's a grain. It's a grain. And I keep saying,
starch.
It's a grain. And then finally, he picks it up 2 months later. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to remind you that I am a professional ethnobotanist, and I can speciate from carbonized remains of seeds and charcoal. Not to mention I'm Cherokee, and I come from corn sun goddess people. So this is cultural and educational. And I politely said he could stick a sock in it. Because I'm like, really? Like, why? This need to question or argue our cultures with this? Because obviously we're extinct, and so is all of our information.
Yeah.
Really reasonable guy otherwise.
That's a big otherwise, though.
Yeah, and just like, but it doesn't even, but a fruit, like an apple tree produces fruit. It is not a fruit. It's just one of those things. I'm not going to win this. I have to walk away. But
sometimes you do. You got to pick a decision, make a decision. Is it worth my time, my energy to continue on with this? Or should I just move on to somebody who is more willing to listen and have a reasonable discussion and learn from people who are experts?
mm-hmm.
That walking away piece is hard, though, man. It's hard.
There's another, I have to be careful because if any of them watch it, I don't want them to self-identify, but we had an affiliate that was working with us for a while, and heart in the right place, very interested in preserving a specific patch of camas, and it wasn't moving quickly enough for this individual. And then they reached out to me on my personal time. It was really kind of rattling me, and they're like, well, I don't see anything being done about it. And I finally was like, well, you're a white guy from the Midwest putting your nose in Native women's business. You're not involved in it because you're not involved in it. Like, to say that this isn't being done when I work with the Camas Killapai group and have for a few years. I know Judy Blue Horse Skelton. I know Sequoia Breck. I know Savannah's Jackson. Judy, right? We all love her. And I'm just like, and he was like, well, I don't see anything being done. And I'm like, because it's not your place.
You know,
like, you're literally inserting yourself into women's power and labor in an organization that you don't come from. Like, this is how women establish their leadership here and their stewardship. Like, great, you want to protect this spot, but you not seeing the work being done does not mean it's not being done.
I'm going to say something. It's not just white men. It's other Native men as well, other men of color that have that toxic masculinity that like to think that they're the ones doing stuff. They're like, oh, I didn't see anything getting done beforehand. Because yeah, we might be working behind closed doors or working, you know, behind the scenes doing stuff, but it doesn't mean it's not getting done. Or they just completely are blinded to any of the public work that is being done. One of the things that is super frustrating to me when I was in Portland is that there was a Native man who came into Portland in the early 2000s, wasn't from Portland, was from the South. And he, you know, Portland has a really robust Native community with a lot of nonprofits, businesses and stuff. And he came in the early 2000s and said that, you know, he wanted to do this, this, and this in Indian education, and nothing's ever been done. It's like, oh, that's really nice, Tandea and Tanara and Portland Public Schools, Indian education, and all the different programs that have been around, but you're doing something that never has been done. It's like, sit down, man. Like, you might be an Indian man, but you are toxic to the Indian people. And then he's like, oh, and then he tried teaching me about Pacific Northwest culture. And I was like, honey, I've been involved in my culture since the day that I was born. I was not one who was raised outside of the culture and then came in. I was going to tribal council meetings as an infant. I was going to fish as an infant. I was doing this and that as an infant. And I'm a leader within my community. And I need you to show me some respect. And like, he continued to bully and harass me throughout the rest of the time that I was there. But it was just that like toxic masculinity, because I was a woman, nothing I said mattered. And it happens. And I think it's important that people realize that, or even are acknowledge that sometimes our own community does it to us. I'm not saying that the men in my tribal community do that to me, because they know better than to do anything like that. But sorry guys, it's true. But you know, when you have outside Native people in it, because it's a relocation area, the whole Portland River area, Clark County, all of that is a relocation area, that you have people coming in with their toxic masculinity. It's a product of colonialism. It's a product of Christianity being spread throughout, and the patriarchy that didn't exist as much in the area. I'm not saying that there weren't patriarchal communities, but it didn't exist in such a way here in this area.
The manifestation is a bit different when you talk about it as an organizational structure versus an oppressive environment.
Yeah.
I mean, as an anthropologist, like, how you track property is not the same way how you silence people. They're related inherently, obviously. Yeah, so that is very interesting. So I guess let's because we're on it, let's just unpack that just a little bit more, because we all know that, you know, matriarchy and the power of mothers, the power of women. And I want to put a disclaimer in here. This is not to lessen the impact of our Two-Spirit family members. I just want to put that out there, that we're not, I don't want this to come across as exclusionary, because I think there are valuable conversations to be had about a false dichotomy that Western society has put on us. So I just want to put that out there.
Well, before you even go into that, I'm going to just say my language doesn't have pronouns. So this idea of gender is very, and as it is he, she, is very, that it's very colonistic. It's not part of who we are. So
yeah. And then, well, at the Clark College powwow, we were talking about having an open mixed gender bathroom, and we're like, do we need to discuss this? And everybody was kind of like, it's part of our communities, so we're just going to do it. And if other people have a problem with it, and they can come to us. So yes, I'm glad I said that as the disclaimer. But yeah, it's trying, when I bring people to the house and they want to discuss gender, I'm like, I don't even know how to explain to you, that's not how we were taught to view things. That's not the same worldview. It's kind of the same thing when I do our first plants talk at the beginning of the year, or Mother's Day, is like, there's a much different relationship we have with the natural environment and our plant relatives when you're taught that they are our family members versus when you're taught that you are beholden over them. I mean, it's just that the authenticity and the relational aspect and how you care for things, whether it's something you've hunted or dug up, your responsibility and the reciprocity of the relationship is very, very much different than getting lordship over it. And it's just a different way of looking at things. So wrapping it back to the women thing, but like I see one of the bigger tragedies in our interior culture is that we do have elders, and it's not just our male elders. Sometimes I see our lady elders doing this as well. That those manifestations of patriarchy pop up in really strange ways. So I think that one of the things that I guess I would say about where leadership is going into the future is that I think with more gender fluidity being out in dominant culture and Indian country embracing our old languages and our old ways of expressing gender and things like that. But also I think that we're getting to where our generations, younger generations are empowered enough in our communities and our culture, and there's enough resurgence and revitalization that our youth are leading us, our youth are unpacking these things, our youth are calling us out and reminding us that these ways of knowing were adopted from other places, and that we can readopt older and I think more authentic and more generous and kind ways of going through things. So it's very interesting. So I'd say leadership is going to be very interested. You know, we're definitely brought up in the ways of our aunties and our elders tell us where to lead, but I think we're going through a very unusual thing where our youth are telling us where they want us to lead. They're like, okay, we're coming up and we need you to do these things for us so it's ready for us. And I think that is so much different than how I felt as a young Native person in high school. Like, it was something, I wasn't attached to my community because there had been so many deaths in the family and we'd moved. So it was sort of something that there was a big portion of being detached. And it was like, well, I know this about me. And then when you start getting back in community, you're like, oh, we do it this way because, oh, and that's way. And then you remember. And so I think that experience of having to be muffled and remembered versus kids that have been so empowered and growing up in it, as far as urban Indigenous kids, that there's a lot more resources available for our communities to be empowered cross-culturally within Indian country, as well as just our individual tribes. So I have a lot of hope for where future is going to go for it, but I think it's very interesting. We're in this position between where our elders are telling us to go and where the youth are telling us where they need us to go. And it's just a really fascinating place to be.
Yeah, one thing that Cowlitz is doing now that wasn't a thing when I was a youth is that we have this youth council, and every time we have a tribal council meeting, at least one member of the youth council is there and is sitting at the tribal council table next to someone who's like their designated buddy for the month, and they get their copies of the papers that we're looking at, and they get to talk through the issues too. And I'm just so excited that we're giving them that on-the-job training and showing them, hey, this is what it's like to serve on the council. I mean, hopefully we're just a marvel of streamlined efficiency by the time they get there, because we do have some long meetings now. But I'm really excited that they're going to get in the sausage factory and see how our government works so that they can both be prepared to step into that role when they're ready, but also so that they can step in with a good understanding of where we are and some clear ideas about where they would like us to be. Because they won't just have to sit there and acclimate for the first year or two that they're on the council. They can say, okay, I've been sitting at this table since I was 10, and let me tell you, there's some things we do great, and there's some other things that I need us to shift around, and they can help bring us into a better space. So I'm super excited about that.
I just, from an educator's point and as a parent, and someone who got to connect much later in life than my daughter is getting to, I just I'm not like tearing up, but I feel that overwhelming emotion of gratitude that your community has that now. Because I know y'all took a long fight to get there. So I have a lot of joy for you at this moment. Rachel, do you have anything you want to wrap up with before we close out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million things that I'd love to say, but we don't have time. I actually have to jump off of this call to get on a parent-teacher conference. Woohoo! I want to say I really enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to future conversations. There's so many things that we could discuss about that gender performativity that we were just talking about a moment ago, and like how previous generations really took on colonized ideas of gender, and how we're as younger folks having to re-educate those elders, and we have to be gentle and kind because they're going through trauma. They went through trauma and had it ingrained. There's a reason why it all happened. And I think that's the most important thing, is especially when we're talking to our youth too, and they're like, well, this is how it's moving. It's like, you also have to understand and be able to have a conversation with the youth about the traumas that occurred that brought us to the point where we are today. And just keep remembering to be kind to one another and kind to ourselves, because if we're not, then we're in another space creating more trauma. So that's what I want to leave with.
No, I think it has been great to hold space with you ladies today. Thank you so much for your time. It's fantastic. I